Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the ByteTalk podcast. And today we have Pedro, which is a guy that I have been following recently. And I was really curious about him. I was like, oh, dude, I have to meet this guy. And today we have him here. Welcome, Pedro.
Yeah, nice. Thanks, guys. Nice to be here.
No, yeah, we're super excited, Pedro. And I know that you work at Modulz as a
Yeah.
developer experience engineer, which is, I would say, it's a fairly new job title. So I'd love to hear what you do, what Modulz does, and yeah, I just want to hear a little bit more about you, what you're doing now.
Yeah, definitely. It's true. It's a new title, and to be honest, it's the first time I'm doing this as well. So not just as a new title in the industry, but it's also new for me. So let me think about where to start. So I think I'll just start from the beginning, just to kind of cover the the sort of the timeline properly. But I joined Modulz, which was it was still a startup, but I joined Modulz back in March 2019. Yeah, March 2019, and or 2018, one or the other. I need to check now. And but at that point, it was still quite small. Like I think me and a colleague of mine, Abdul, who is still working at Modulz, we were like the first round of hires, and it was interesting at the time because a friend of mine, Benoit, found the job listing and he sent it over and he said, "Man, I just found like the perfect like job title for you, because we've worked together in the past in a few different places." And the job title was kind of explaining what the company did and stuff, and it was like this. It was basically a UI developer who loves to bridge the gap between tech and design, and who is passionate about design systems, and who is curious to see how we can explore how people will be building websites in the future. Let's say, like how can we allow designers especially to have more impact on the final product rather than just sort of designing things on a sort of like a free flow canvas, let's say. So, and that as a developer, as a UI developer, let's say, because I always like to kind of call myself more a UI specialized developer, I thought that was super interesting because all the jobs I had up until that point was pretty much doing this sort of bridging, and I always enjoyed that because I always liked design. I used to be a designer right back when I started sort of like working, but like when I discovered tech, I kind of fell in love a lot more with like bringing the designs to life, and I loved it. And it was right at the moment where there was this separation between like front-end developer and designer. So the front-end term fit really well with me back then. So I kind of abandoned sort of design from a professional, endeavor, let's say. But that's why kind of working with designers on the tech side, working with designers and trying to, build a better product by sort of outlining to them the limitations, but not just the limitations, but also the things that could be done that sometimes are not even considered when you're designing in a sort of like static mode, static land. And I always enjoyed that so much, and I was like, man, this is cool. Like I kind of jumped on the sort of like, let's say, design system hype train right from the beginning, when people were doing like component libraries and style guides and all these things, And I always liked the more systematic approach to UI. So that's kind of like that was the job, And I was like, man, like I love this. And I was like, I was with my girlfriend next to me at the time. Well, she's still my girlfriend at the time, as in like when I was applying. And I was like, man, I don't know if I'm gonna apply. We had a newborn at home. She was like,
Wow.
she was like, our daughter was like 2 months, maybe a month and a half at the time. It's like, oh man,
And
I
you
don't know if
were
it's the right.
in London, right? Is that
I
correct?
was in London.
Or
Yeah,
in
yeah, I
UK?
was in London.
Okay.
Yeah. At the time, I was still in London, and I was like, oh man, I don't know if it's the right time to change jobs and stuff, you know, especially in a startup. And but I was like, oh fuck it, I'll just apply anyway because you know, like what are the chances anyway, right? Like, you know, you can just apply. And I remember it was like a 6-step process, and I just kept going past step by step, you know. And at the end, when they gave me an offer and it became a reality, I was like, oh shit, what did I do? You know, like we have to make a decision. So anyway, we took the plunge because even though we're a bit scared of like, you know, the amount of work and the pressure and, you know, plus being a new dad and also for my partner, new mom, that alone comes with a bunch of its own challenges and stuff. But we decided to do it. It was remote. It would be my first sort of full remote experience. And we did. And then, so we start, so at that first hire, we were in a pre-seed round, I believe. So we started working on prototypes, building the tool, building our design system, exploring ways in which we can build UIs better with an API that could be sort of understood by computers as well as by humans. And that's where everything started, you know. And then we got the seed round, and then we hired a few more people. And then we hired Benoit, the guy who found me the job in the first place.
That's so nice.
Yeah. And then, you know, then we kind of raised a bit more money, and now it's been almost 3, actually, yeah. So we're in June. So back in March, a couple of months ago, was 2 years that I was at Modulz. Yeah, 2 years. And so yeah, and now we are at a point that Modulz, as the tool has evolved a lot. We've done loads of different sort of like attempts at how to do it right. And now we kind of we've got a team. Now the team's a bit more segregated. So we've got a team of people working on the composer, which is the visual editor. We've got a team of people working on Radix, which is our low-level set of accessible components. That's kind of what powers everything under the hood. And then we've got a team working on Stitches, which is our CSS and JS library, which is what creates that bridge between what people do in the UI and the code that it writes in the background. And so as a result of that, and kind of naturally, I sort of moved into more this sort of DevRel role, where my job was more to write all the docs, write articles, try to explain to people what Modulz is, what Stitches and Radix, what do they do, what's the benefit of them, helping people out with issues, you know. So you kind of needed someone that knew how to code, was previously a developer, but enjoyed the sort of more community-facing side of things. And that's what I'm doing, man. I'm kind of winging it at the moment, but I'm liking it, you know.
That's awesome.
That's so cool. Yeah, I would love to hear more about Stitches and Radix, but I want to take a step back because you mentioned like switching jobs as a new parent and how challenging that is, you know, how scary that is. I would love to hear from you, like how, now that you are a parent, like how do you feel about like maybe new people in your team that are going through that experience? Do you have a different level of empathy to them? And yeah, just how was the whole experience, man? Because I have tons of friends like on their early 30s or late 20s that they're now new parents, and I see the struggle firsthand. So how was it?
Yeah, man, it's a good question. It's good to go on the personal level. There's a lot of things that when people see from the outside, they could never imagine, especially when you see how people are on Twitter, you know, or like Johnny, you're like, oh, you know, the food is great in Barcelona, but it's like, yeah, maybe the nice food is like the sort of miracle that happens once a month, you know. So it's good to go behind the scenes. And at that time, switching jobs we knew it was like a risky thing to do, not just financially, because also I took like a pay cut from the job. I was in like a fintech company in London at the time, so I was earning quite well. So in Modulz was still at pre-seed, you know. So it was also financially was okay, you know. We live in London at the end of the day, still an expensive place. But it was more the risk and the fear of the workload and the mental load, the stress load, and trying to, help out as much as I could. But with that fear and with that risk, it could have gone two ways, right? Because, of course, I had spoken to Colum and Stephen, the founders of Modulz, while I was interviewing to get a sense of the culture, at least the culture of the founders, because, the culture of the founders is what's going to sort of like, trickle down to the rest of the team. And they seem really nice and they seem really down to earth. And I'm super, looking back now, at least on that sort of perspective, I'm super glad I went with this, because they weren't just nice in the interviews, and they're super understanding with people in terms of work-life balance and all this. So from this perspective, great. But it was tough, it was tough to leave a job where I was comfortable with the team. I knew everybody. I was a tech lead, meaning I was quite hands-off from coding. I was a lot more like client facing, so it was a relatively comfortable job. I could go to work at like 10 a.m. We could leave around 5 p.m. have lunch. It was, it was easy ride, and which meant I could help out at home a lot, But then I thought, but man, if it's remote, and not just remote, like you can work your own hours. Or like I can try and find hours like that don't conflict too much with our timings, So maybe I can work later in the evenings, or which I like working late anyway. So that was kind of the idea. I was like, man, let's take the risk. This can go both ways, but let's try. And we did, and that's kind of why we moved to Barcelona, by the way, because we were living in London. My parents lived there, so we had a bit of help, which already in London is already considered like you're already considered like a more premium level, because a lot of people that have kids in London, usually their parents don't live there. Even if you're from England, chances are your parents may live like outside of London, whereas my parents lived in London, so my mom would come over and help. But even with all this help, it was pretty hard. It was like the hardest time ever. And I don't know if it was hard because of how I am as a person, or if it was hard because of my expectations. Like, people don't teach you how it's going to be when you have a kid, right? You do this like this prenatal lessons, and they teach you how the baby is going to be born. But after that point, it's like, man, you're on your own, So it was a bit tough, and there was a large and steep learning curve, both from how to be a parent, how to be a different type of partner to your partner or to your girlfriend, because you're no longer, at least in my experience, right, you're no longer in a boyfriend girlfriend romantic let's go for dinner type of relationship. You're now like way more of like, you're a team and you got to work together to raise this kid and to help each other out. So when I look back now, I think I put a tweet thread a few months ago about this. I started doing therapy about 4 months ago, I think. Something I've always wanted to do, and I really wish I did back then. It would have helped a lot to understand how you feel and how you can deal with certain types of situations. And so looking back now, I think it was a bit of a crazy thing to do. And I think that the sort of like conservative and more careful side of me would have gone, you know what, stay in this job, wait a year. The first year was definitely the toughest one. Like, our daughter's going to be 3 soon. And since she turned 1, things got easier. And it feels like they're gradually getting easier. So if I had changed jobs when she was 1, it would have been easier than when she was like 2 months old. But man, I don't really look back and regret. I just look back and think that it was pretty intense. It was an intense moment. Yeah.
Do you view like your contribution even to your company a little bit differently? Like, I would imagine that, I don't have kids myself, but I would imagine that there's just a different perspective before there's as many external responsibilities in your life, and you're able to like work as many hours as you want to for your career, and you're able to put like almost infinite amount of mental energy, and you kind of can pour yourself into your job in a certain way in those seasons. But then when you have more external responsibilities like a family or even other projects that you're working on or whatever, you're not able to invest in the same way, but you can still invest in like really big ways in your career and stuff. Have you seen like even in the last couple of years that change? And like you were mentioning even the amount of time you're working, like, okay, you were comfortable at the old spot. Are you working more now, or have you found a sweet spot and like how much you contribute in that way? Or
it's a good question, because I think a lot of people, when they're hiring parents, they think, oh, this person is not going to put in as many hours. It's kind of like almost like a prejudice that you see around sometimes. And on one hand, it's true. Like, you're not going to be able to put in as many hours. But on the other hand is, how effective are the hours you put in?
Yeah.
How productive are you the hours you're at work? And I worked in many agencies, ad agencies, product side, editorial, like different types of industries or kind of clients, let's say, where I had to be in at 9 and leave at 6. And many times I had nothing to do after 4 p.m. and I was there for 2 hours doing nothing. Or you're actually working across the clock because you need to deliver a pitch for a mass, let's say, like, I don't know, I don't want to say names because then people will know what I mean, but like say a big client or whatever. And you realize that the only reason you're working, 24 hours in a row is because of the politics and the bad project management. So it's like, okay, you put in all these hours, but you're redoing things that you've done over and over again. So I'm trying to think how I can best answer that question. But in a way, like one of the things I had to adapt is I've always kind of worked a lot out of my own desire, let's say. Like especially if I was enjoying what I was working on, I struggle to stop, And I think even now, when I see the number of hours that I work on a weekly basis, even today, I think it's a bit much. I definitely work more than my 40 hours a week, and I still have a family and stuff. And a lot of the times it's because I work late hours and stuff, but it's just because most of the time I just want to finish what I'm doing. Or now that I'm working on community, it's very easy to check Discord or to check GitHub or Twitter, and there's someone stuck on something. And I just want to go in and help them. And, you can see people on Discord, like, they will say, like, I'm almost always around, which is kind of weird. But one thing, maybe I should change that. But one thing that, as you were asking that question that came to my mind was, like, when I was kind of single, let's say, when I was childless, they say the term childless, right? It's a bit weird, but anyway, say I was stuck on a problem and it's like 6 p.m, time to leave work, right? I could continue, right? No problem. And maybe I would call my partner, Clara, like, hey, I'm going to work late tonight. Order some pizza or whatever. And I'm just saying that for the record, like, because I want to, not because my bosses are forcing me to anything like this.
Yeah.
And then when I get it done, or when I get to a point where I can see the light at the end of the tunnel, I can go home and I'm relaxed. I'm rested, as in like I kind of know what to do the next day, and I'm a little bit like that. But at the beginning, when I was in the middle of something and I had to stop and I had to switch from being a developer to being a dad, and this switch happened in this space of 2 minutes. That was tough, man. Like that sort of mental switch, it was really tough, and I struggled with that a lot, and I would get quite anxious because I wanted to find out why this bloody TypeScript error was happening, or why the build is not passing. But at the same time, I wanted to spend quality time with my daughter when I'm there, and I couldn't do either of them. And it took me a while to learn. And now I can say that I'm much better with this, with the experience of going through this, and also trying to weigh different priorities in my life. And now that my daughter is older, I can interact with her a lot more than I could when she was a baby. And so I kind of feel like that has a massive sort of like, it's a massive difference, because, if I'm on my phone, a lot of the time she'll be like, Daddy, like, no phone, And it's like, of course, you don't want to use the phone. You want to spend time, but sometimes you have to do it. I still do it sometimes. It's like, I feel bad, but yeah, man, like, I hope that answers your question, but it's a difficult switch, and it took me a while to accept that I'm putting in less hours than I was, but somehow now I feel like the hours I put in are quite valuable. Like, it's almost like you become better at managing your workload and procrastinating less.
Yeah.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
And what was the role of therapy, that process? Because I also do therapy, and I feel like in the beginning, I would look at, like, many years ago, I'll look at therapy as, oh, you're like a crazy person if you have to do therapy, or you have like some really big issues. And it's not like that, it's just like a way for you to process your emotions, your struggles, your challenges, and also like ideas that you have around life, right? How did therapy help you in that process of figuring out this parenthood life?
It helped a lot, man. It's been, like I said, about 4 months, and what helps the most? This is kind of almost like a little bit of a light bulb moment that I had a while ago. That was, my therapy is every Monday at 9 a.m. So it's like first thing of the week, right? And that just happens by it was the available slot. So every Monday, every week, I start my week by going to this place here in Barcelona, and I spend 50 minutes to 1 hour talking about, usually now we're at a point that I'm talking about, like, how am I doing mentally, how am I feeling, and how was my week, what happened during my week that kind of triggered certain emotions, right? And what happens now is that I have 1 hour a week that I can pause and process. It's almost like doing like a retrospective over what happened just in the last week. And maybe I will do that just for the first 10 or 15 minutes, or maybe that will be the entire session. And I had never done that before. Every Monday was a new week. And all the stress from the week before maybe accumulates and keeps accumulating, or even like happy moments get forgotten. They get left behind because something happy happened, but you never talked about it. And not just happy and sadness, but there's a bunch of feelings in between. So this checkpoint that happens on a weekly basis is something I started to look forward to. And I really like that. And it's also helped kind of prioritize certain things, for me. Especially when it comes to that line and that division between work, professional life, family, like my partner and my daughter, but also my own independent life. Times that I can go and get that burger, that smash burger I was telling you about with my friends, or I can go and go for a run or ride my bike. And which that didn't happen. Like, that sort of time for me was the thing that was right at the bottom of the sort of stack for a long time. So it's helped a lot, man. And like, I talked to a good friend of mine who just started like 2 weeks ago. And it's great, man. Like, I just feel like, I'm overall a healthy person. Right, I eat smash burgers, but I'm overall quite healthy. Like I like I run often. I work out a few times a week. You know, like I cycle. Like you know. And I do that because I want to kind of look after my body a little bit, you know, in my general health. And why not do the same with my mind, with my mental health, you know? So that's kind of where we're at right now. And I have no sort of like, no plan to stop it anytime soon.
Yeah, thanks for sharing all that. That's really cool.
And I'm curious, like, how did the city that you live in also affected your professional life? Because London is completely different from Barcelona. It's maybe like the polar opposite of cities, you know, or maybe just like the way I'm viewing it's not accurate. So I'll love to hear from you too. Like, what was the difference between working in London, working in Barcelona now?
Yeah, man, I think it's true that they're quite different. I grew up in London. I was there since I was 13 years old. So I kind of spent most of my life in England anyway, even though I was born in Brazil. You know, London felt like my home. My closest friends are in London. You know, like my first sort of programming job, or my first job in the industry was in London. All the agencies I worked in, you know, like, so it was a place that I knew quite well, right? Like I would wake up in the morning and I would just go. I could go anywhere in London and I was on autopilot. I knew which train to take, or the tube, or when to change, or take the bus, or I could ride my bike around London. It was fine. It was great. You know, and also I spoke English, and I was quite embedded in the British culture because I grew up there. Unlike a lot of the friends I had, even like I had lots of Brazilian friends in London, or friends from around the world, but they moved there as an adult, and it's different, right? Like you probably not as, you know, you probably don't feel like London is your home as much. Whereas for me, I did, so much so that when I first met Clara, she was like, oh, you know, do you ever think we will move somewhere else in the future? And I was like, no, like, why would we move somewhere else? You know, like, and so, but of course, like all the jobs I had in London, they were in-office jobs, right? So I had never experienced working remotely in London. So when I got the job at Modulz, I just rented like a WeWork space. And that was my first experience. And I was there for 6 months. And I hated it, man. Like I truly
Really
hated it, you know. And I was like, and you know, at that point I also questioned everything. I was like, fuck, like I really enjoyed I'm quite an extrovert type of person, and I enjoyed going to the office and making a coffee and having a bit of a laugh with some colleagues and go for lunch, you know, like play FIFA sometimes on the PlayStation, you know. It was cool. It was like, oh man, I don't know if remote job is for me, you know. And at WeWork, I couldn't really connect with people because you're in the same room, but you work in your own stuff, right? Like you're not working together, and you can make friends and connect with people. You can. People do that. But I couldn't. It didn't work for me. And also, I was in a room where I think I was like the only sort of dad. And I had like to leave at random times to go home, look after Nina, our daughter, for a bit and go back. So I was always in and out, you know. And I was like, oh man. So when Clara was like, hey, we'd start talking about moving to London. Moving to Barcelona from London. At that point, I was like, man, most of my friends are leaving London because they're having kids, or they're kind of buying a house and they don't want to buy like a small flat in London for £1 million. So they're kind of moving out. I'm working remote, which means I don't even have that many sort of like connections with people, let's say. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And we lived in it was a 1-bedroom apartment, and you know, we were already starting to feel like this place is going to be too small for us soon, you know, as our daughter grows. And even though we had help from my mom and dad, which was great, they still worked. They weren't retired, so we could have their help, but mainly on the weekends. whereas Clara's parents were retired already. And the last thing that we were sort of, talking about was how actually having a baby in London is more difficult than having a baby in Barcelona. First, London is a huge city. So if you just want to go and have a coffee with your friend, with your baby, you're going to take an hour to get there, an hour to come back. If people let you get on the train, if you manage to avoid the rush hour. It's not a very baby-friendly place. It's a city built around, people going to work, man, and going out to the pubs. Like that's my honest view of London, and I loved living there up until that point. And then we thought, man, Barcelona is sunny. The weather is way more welcoming for you to go outside and spend more time outdoors. We have Clara's parents' help. I've got a remote job already, so literally I can move to Barcelona tomorrow. Nothing changes, right? And it is a friendlier place for babies. So much so that you go out on the street here and you see babies everywhere, man. It's like a city full of babies.
Sounds nice.
It's not. You go to a cafe and there's a baby crying next to you, and that's okay. Whereas in London, it's happened to us before that we go to a pub and people would move to a different table because maybe they were trying to chat, and it's okay. Look, I understand you want to move to a different table if there's a baby crying next to you. I get it. But it's just not nice for the parent. It's not nice for you because when your baby's crying, you're already feeling bad for the people next to you. It's not like you're like, yeah, fuck these people, man. Like, I hope they can't chat to each other. You're like, oh man, like. So, yeah. So, and then they leave and they move on. And then it's like it makes you feel bad. And this type of stuff, at least, like, this is all from my experience. I know there are people that have raised kids in London, no problems, But for us, we had this opportunity to come here. And the only question was, am I okay having to learn a new language? In which case, maybe 2 new languages because, in Barcelona, the sort of official language is Catalan. And Clara's family speak Catalan, and Clara speaks Catalan to her daughter because that's her mother tongue. And so my daughter will grow up speaking Catalan. Even if we stayed in London, she would grow up speaking Catalan. So for me, I already decided that I want to learn Catalan as well as I want to learn Spanish because it's just the sort of most, I guess it's the most useful language. You can get by just with Spanish, but if you speak Catalan, it's nice. You're speaking their official language, and I appreciate that. So that was kind of like the thing, and I was like, yeah, that's fine, man. I already learned English, and Spanish is similar to Portuguese, so I know I can learn. And then we did, man, and we rented a place here where we are now. It's a 3-bedroom flat instead of 1. So like Nina has her own room. I've got an office. That's my own office. I can close the door. I don't have to go to WeWork. And it's been good, man. Like I feel like my work-life balance has improved so much since being here because it's a very, like I said earlier, like there's a lot of outdoors activity here. You always see people running and cycling, going to the beach for a swim or just walking around, and places are not, of course, not with COVID. Actually, a few months later, COVID happened, so we just stayed indoors anyway.
Wow.
And
that's crazy.
But yeah, it's been good, man. It's been good.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I heard from a friend in Spain. Actually, he told me about this. That he had this great analogy about when you raise a kid speaking 2 languages, where he said that as our brain develops, and if we only speak 1 language, it's almost like we have a variable that we define as a string. So you see a phone, you see this object, it's a phone. You see this, it's a can. So you always map 1 to 1, right? And he was saying like how if you learn 2 languages as you're growing up, everything that you map in your brain, it's like an array. So you see this, it's both a telefone in Portuguese and also a phone. So this is a very interesting way of looking at the world, right? And
Yeah.
when you see everything, every object around you, every concept around you, as something that could have multiple meanings. Not only two, in fact, there are like 150 different concepts. So how it has been for you to, and I know like we're getting really personal here. Maybe you didn't expect this, but how is it for you? Like, yeah, yeah. Like how is it like having a kid teaching two languages, speaking different languages to your child, to your daughter? Is that been a challenge? How has it been?
I think the only thing we've noticed is that she started speaking a little bit later than other kids. Like we had some friends here that just speak Spanish or just speak Catalan, or there was even a family here that of English people, they just spoke English. And we felt like Nina took a few more months to start saying stuff. I mean, she's still only 2.5, so it's not like she's speaking a lot, but she's speaking quite well. So I think once she got that initial, I think she was probably in her brain still making sense of things. And maybe she didn't speak because she didn't know. Maybe she was confused, like with the phone. She was like, oh, do I say phone or do I say, telefone? Actually, I don't speak to her in Portuguese, but she would say that in Catalan. But now, man, now it's fine because I just speak to her in English. Clara just speaks to her in Catalan. And she always replies to Clara in Catalan. She replies to me in English. And man, like, it's so funny because the other day I was having lunch with her, just me and her. And I was playing around with her and I made a joke and I asked her, do you want a glass? I said, do you want water? I always say, do you want water? But I said, do you want water in Catalan? Because Clara always says that. And I said it as a joke, And then she looked at me very serious, like, no, daddy. She said, water. Agua no. And I was like, fuck. Like she really knows that,
It's different.
Even she understood, like, I'm supposed to say, do you want water? And it was hilarious, man. So, but I think if you stick to it from what we read and the sort of bilingual parents that are raising, or the parents that are raising bilingual kids, they just said to us, like, the most important thing is that you just stick to that one language,
Okay.
So I probably should stop doing these jokes with her. Otherwise she's just gonna give up.
That's so cool. It's almost like
man.
you just get to instill a little superpower into your kid, something that they would later on have to put a significant amount of effort into, like even, the process that you're going through now of learning new languages. It's like, I would guess it's exponentially harder for you as an adult to do that than for your daughter to basically just almost inherit it, like in her life, right? And that's something that she'll have for the rest of her life too. Maybe that will affect her job opportunities in the future, or future spouse, partner opportunities and things like that. So it's really cool.
Let's not talk about partners yet.
Dude, she's already 3, right? I mean,
No, that's true, man. That's very true. So much so that I've been kind of learning Catalan, not just since she was born, but already before, maybe for like 7 years, let's say, because whenever I visited Clara's family, they don't speak English. I would sort of start trying to speak Catalan. And okay, fair enough, I didn't really practice or take lessons, but I had sort of like, I was always listening to it. And already, sometimes Clara says stuff to Nina that she understands and I don't.
Wow.
And that's crazy.
That's amazing.
It just shows how bad my Catalan still is, or how fast she's picking that up. I think it's an in between.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah, man.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's so crazy. And switching gears a little bit, this has been like a really fun episode so far. Like, man, I feel like I learned a lot so far, and it's been so interesting. But I'm super curious about Modulz, Stitches, and Radix. So I really want to hear from you. Like, how are these? First, let's talk about the libraries. Like, how are they different from what's already exists today with other tools? Like, how do you see them in this spectrum of front-end tooling?
So maybe I'll talk first about Radix, because I think that might be a little bit that might be easier to compare in terms of other tooling. But basically, Radix is like this set of very low-level primitives to the web that are built in first and foremost with accessibility in mind, and second with customization in mind. But customization while respecting the right usage for that specific primitive. And that's a very, very interesting thing when you think about, because already we're starting to try and create this sort of like system where by giving people the right features, they will more easily know which components they should be using when, which today is a bit of a problem in this sort of like digital world. Like, you see people using the wrong components for different things, and that's part of the reason why things are quite inaccessible. So then third comes the fact that all of these primitives, they are completely naked in terms of styling. Like, if you just take one and you put it on your website, it's going to look broken because there's no styling whatsoever. But all the features, all the functionality is there, which is interesting, right? Because if you take one of those primitives, say like an accordion or like a tabs, for you that you can see is going to look broken because there's no styling. But actually, it's going to work and it's going to behave as it should. So if a screen reader is using your application, even though it looks broken to you, it's going to work perfectly fine for them. It's almost like the other way around, right?
Interesting.
With that, it comes the fact that they have been built in a level that is low enough to give you flexibility over the styling. Like, so far we've not had a single person that tried to do a specific style on a specific component at a specific state and they couldn't, you know?
Oh, nice. That's good.
But they have a very sort of well thought out API, which gives people the sort of ease of getting started. So it's for developers of all different skill sets or experience, let's say. But, you know, they're not that low level that is quite hard to use. And that's the problem when you go low level. So they're low level enough, but they're flexible enough. So that's kind of like the premise of Radix, and following this set of, let's say, heuristics, we build all of the primitives. And we've got quite a lot now. We think we've got 25, 26, maybe 27, and there's more coming. And that's so one of the difference. Let me try and answer the question, because sometimes as I start talking, I forget the original question. But the difference is you've got other players in this game, and we never even we don't even call them competitors or anything like this, because the more people that build accessible components, the better it is for everybody. So you've got Reach UI. They've been doing that already for a while. They're the most similar to us. Well, we're actually similar to them, if you think about it, because they started doing this type of things before. Then you've got Reakit, which is a bit more low level. They do the same thing, but they offer a different API, which is based on hooks. Then you've got React Aria, which is backed by Adobe. And I'm not even going to say backed by Adobe, but it's part of an Adobe team, which is also very, very low level, but it's very good as well. It's very thorough. And now you've got the last one. There must be more. I'm just naming the sort of biggest ones. It's Headless UI. That's by Tailwind Labs. And that also has a different API. Obviously, that API is more optimized if you're using Tailwind. So they offer an API that's easier for you to add styles via class names. So, you know, it's good. If you're using Tailwind, you might find the Headless UI gives you a nicer API. If you're using React, you may want to use Radix. And for now, these are the React ones, right? I don't know much about what's happening in Vue or in Svelte or other frameworks. But our differentiator right now is that, especially if I compare with Rich UI and Reakit, it's that this is not like a side project. It's not like, oh, hey, I'm going to try and build this cool thing. Oh, but actually I'm quite busy to fix this bug because I've got a newborn baby at home, you know.
Mm-hmm.
This is like a proper funded project, and we have a full-time team of people working on it that consists of Benoit, Jenna, and Andy. And, you know, like, that's their job, you know. And so it's backed by us. Everything that we do, we use like all of the primitives. And the reason how we prioritize them also is that all of them get used in modules, in the composer or somewhere in modules, you know. So we test them firsthand. And, you know, is the fact that it's like a part of modules is a big differentiator. It's almost like you use React because you know Facebook uses React and they invest a bunch of money every year to get React maintained and you know, improved and all of these things. So that would be Radix for us. And so far it's going quite well, you know, like this whole thing of building low-level components is tricky. It's really, really hard. I even put a tweet earlier today saying how much time a developer can save by using these primitives. I don't even know how to explain. I don't even know how to quantify that. It's so much. You know, it's like...
It's almost like you're fulfilling a gap in the platform level too, right? Because let's say if we had those primitives already in the platform, like an accordion or other patterns that are extremely popular, but we don't have an HTML element that represents an accordion necessarily, like the way you normally see, right?
Yeah.
Like you have details, but maybe that's not exactly what you're looking for. So in the end, like that's what you're doing too, right? Like it would be amazing if those things were already baked in and you could leverage that to build your components. But
yeah, if they were baked in, that would be amazing. And I would be happy that if we didn't have this project, you know. The truth though is, even if they get baked in, which it looks like a lot of these will, the platform is always going to be behind for many reasons. It has to, right? Like it's never going to be at the cutting edge. And so we can be at the cutting edge, and if we need to start deprecating some of those because the platform introduced them, perfect. But yeah, it's true. And I think one of the most interesting things is the fact that we try to really respect the usage of each primitive, you know, and I think that's nice. And a lot of the times already, like we get people saying, hey, I'm using the tooltip for this, you know. It's like, but you know, tooltips are not really supposed to have interactive elements inside of them. Should you not be using a popover instead? They're very similar, right? It's like a floating element portaled position relative to a trigger that needs to appear based on a user interaction. Now, what that interaction is differs. It's either a hover for tooltip or it's a click for popover, and the content that should be inside of them differ. You know, usually tooltips are meant to just have a descriptive label of what's going to happen if you click on that button. And by the time you click, it's too late. The tooltip can go away. Like there's no more need for that anymore. Whereas a popover is when you click, then you get that. And then within the popover, there may be the next step or whatever action you may need to take. So, you know, we're trying to work on that, and there's a lot of work to be done from documentation, you know, side of things, like a list of like, I already, when I close my eyes, like I already imagine so many things we can do, you know, like imagine for each primitive, you have like wall of examples that teach you like different contexts and how this component can be used in different ways. And it's just it's almost like becoming an educational platform. and I really like that part. I love, because even me myself, man, like there's loads of times in my life that because I couldn't build a certain component or there wasn't something online, I would use the wrong component for something, or you're like, oh man, that's fine, I'm just going to build a tooltip with CSS pseudo elements. Yeah, you can do that very easily, but it's just not the same, So
Interesting.
so that's kind of Radix, that's like this sort of base that powers a lot of these components that we want to give to people, and we want to make them accessible. They're going to be built on top of Radix. So our design system is built on top of Radix. Vercel is using Radix. I think Code Sandbox started using Radix. There's a few other companies that are starting to use Radix. Like I'm talking like the sort of big names. So that's good. And with Modulz being a visual tool, we sort of needed a way and an API to say, look, this is a tooltip. I want to list in a visual way what are all the possible states that this tooltip can exist in, and all the styles that can be applied. Now there was something missing in between, which is how do we apply these styles? Do we just write CSS? Do we use an existing library like style components? So we tried a few different things before we finally bit the bullet and built Stitches. The need for Stitches was that we want an API that can give users their full power over the intent that they want to describe to that component. So that means giving people a way to build and to think about their styles in variants, which is already like an idea that we had been exploring for a few years. And it needed an API that was strict enough that a computer like Modulz could parse, read and parse this API. So as the user is changing stuff in the Modulz GUI, we can write the right CSS in the right place. But also that was pleasant to be coded by hand. It's a fine line because it's easy to write something that's machine parsable.
Yeah.
That's the easy part, right? You just do like some, AST or whatever, and you can easily parse these things. But then it's not good for people to write it by hand.
Yeah.
So we came up with the Stitches API with that as like the top priority. And in the end, we built this CSS and JS library that had to be extremely performant and it had to be lightweight, because we want things to be fast, So we wanted minimal runtime cost. And so we started building Stitches, actually like there was already the Stitches project already kind of existed. It was very similar to what we wanted to do. So, and it was done by a guy called Christian who works at Code Sandbox. So I started chatting to Christian, and with him, we started changing the API, and that's how I started like putting in all the API that I had drafted. I had like 2 or 3 Notion pages just full of API ideas, and we started putting that in. And then he ended up just handing over the project to us because it started becoming, I guess, big for him. For him, it was just a side project.
Yeah.
And eventually we kind of stripped everything out and we sort of started from scratch just because of the needs that we had. But initially it was Christian, the Christian Alfoni, who put that together. And then, Stitches started becoming like the main focus for me. For the last 6 months, I think I've been like 70% just on Stitches, working on the API and stuff. And then we hired Jonathan Neal, who is an amazing developer, and I already I consider him a friend of mine. And we hired him specifically to work on Stitches, and he actually was contributing to Stitches already. That's how we found him. We're like, man, this guy's contributions are good, And it turns out Jonathan Neal has been involved in the CSS working group and CSS community for a long time. Was
Normalize
even the creator
CSS.
of Normalize, man. Everybody, I always thought it was Nicholas Gallagher, but turns out it was Jonathan who actually created it first. And then he contributed to many post CSS plugins. I think 500, if I'm not mistaken.
Wow.
Yeah, man, like his knowledge of CSS is serious business, you know. And I'm not talking about his knowledge of CSS, of being an amazing UI developer that writes CSS, because that's what I did, you know. His knowledge of CSS goes way deeper than this, you know. And it was perfect for us, and it was perfect for him. It's something that he really wanted to do. So together, I've been working super close with him, and we're building Stitches, and Stitches is getting really, really good to our needs. And there's a lot of big plans for Stitches. We have ideas of turning it into, not turning it, but also offering a zero runtime library if people want to use Stitches as a static extractor type of tool. You know, once we have the API, we can do anything we want. And so now we have this communication, right? Of Modulz can talk to the styles, and Modulz can talk to the Radix and Stitches were built in a way that they can already work very well together. And so now the next step is putting everything together, you know, and allow people to do that work visually. And that's what we're working on right now.
That's amazing. Yeah, that's so cool. I can only imagine a really bright future for all of that, and I'm excited to see how it pans out. We like to close every episode with the same question. So we want to know, as a highly productive person in the tech industry, what is something that is making you productive right now? Like something on your desk, it could be like a software on your computer, a tool, it could be some physical. Yeah, what is this? I've seen you holding it.
This, I have to give you the name later, but this was a present. This was a present from a friend of mine for my 30th birthday, and this is like a piece of art.
Wow.
And it's fully made out of silver. It's extremely heavy, even though you can't tell. It's almost like a jewel, you know, and he gave that to me because he works in the art industry, like mid-century arts. And this was designed, I think, by a Norwegian artist. I'll send you the name later because I don't remember off the top of my head.
Yeah. That's so cool.
But yeah, man, like I've been using Things a lot. You know, the app. So I use Things like quite a lot now. Like everything's pretty much on there. When I have
their UI is beautiful, right?
Man, like I've always been hesitant to use any tools, and I've always like, no, man, I can keep everything in my head, you know, like and that worked up until 2.5 years ago. And so recently I started using Things, and now I'm using it a lot, even for things like, so, you know, we've got a Discord channel, and say somebody asks a message, but then maybe in 3 hours that message is going to be gone and I might not see it. Yeah. So then I might put something on my Things on my phone, hey, reply to this guy on Discord, you know. So even like reply to someone on Twitter DM, because sometimes I read the DM. I don't even know if you can mark it as unread, but I don't think you can. So then if I don't do that, I kind of forget. Yeah. So that's what's making me the most productive. There's the sort of like this productivity too, and I only use Things. I don't use anything else, because I also feel like if I try to use too many things, it has the opposite effect for me. And another thing that is making me productive is completely an offline thing. Of course, this thing here, but apart from this is the fact that since I started prioritizing a little bit more time for myself, either to go running or go for a bike ride or take photos and stuff, I start enjoying that again. And it's almost like if I'm productive, that's my reward. I'm productive because I want to have a little bit of time each day that I can go for half an hour or an hour and do something alone, or meet with a mate for a coffee, you know. And that is almost like it drives me to also be productive, which is working surprisingly well. That's
amazing.
Yeah,
so much, Pedro. Yeah, this has been a really cool conversation. I'm glad that John connected us. He's a big friend of us too. Me and Johnny, we love him. And yeah, it was really special to have you here. This is the first time that we started recording at 7:30 a.m. Because of you. So.
Oh wow, good morning.
So I'm gonna go back to bed.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, you guys are looking fresh for 7:30.
Yeah. Thanks, man. I needed that.
But we really appreciate it, and thank you for everything that you're doing. Your work is really inspiring. So keep it up, dude. It's awesome.
Yeah, thanks, man. And I'll just give a shout out to all the people that work at Modulz, because I feel like recently I'm the one demoing all their work and stuff. But, you know, it's really all the amazing colleagues that spend all day building these amazing tools. I'm getting the opportunity to show it off, but, you know, they're the ones behind the scenes really making it work.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the ByteTalk podcast. You can subscribe to be notified of our weekly episodes. And of course, if you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to like, comment, and share with your friends. See you next week.